The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers' 33rd Annual Convention. We take you live to the Renaissance Suites Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, where our session is just getting underway.
Our topic today is ethics as it affects the square dance world. And we have two ethical companions here. There's John Kaltenthaler on my left, who lives by the ethics. And we have a businessman here who has been ethical all his life. And so we have Bill Heyman and John Kaltenthaler, who are my compatriots. I'm sort of a moderator. I have a few things I'm going to say, and then I'm going to turn it over to John first, and we'll turn it over to Bill. And I think they both have, shall we say, their own ideas, and I'm very happy to have them with me. First of all, what is ethics all about? Would somebody care to give me a definition of ethics? Don't be chicken. Doing the right thing. Okay. You wouldn't like to add anything to that, would you? Doing the wrong thing. Not doing the wrong thing at the wrong time? That's not ethics. I have 4 or 5 of them on the handout. There is a handout here if you want to get one. Basically, it's just a very short outline. Professional callers must wholeheartedly subscribe to the established standard of relationships to accomplish the declared purpose and the objective for the caller and square dancing profession. And it was one of the first things that CALLERLAB did when it met for the very first time. And it's one of the first things that they really agreed on, was that we have to have a code of ethics. And they agreed on what that code was all about. And one of the things I think that's, if you were to do, and it was published in a newspaper tomorrow, would you be happy about it? So that's sort of an idea of what ethics is. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And doing the right thing is usually the hardest thing to do. Doing the right thing may be the hardest, but you only have to do it once. Taking the easy way usually causes a lot of trouble. So that's one of the results of poor ethics. If it's a trouble, in the end, you didn't do it right in the first place, and it wasn't ethical to do it. Ethics, according to Webster, it's the basics of the golden rule. Too many people today live by the rule of do unto others before they do unto you.
But do it first.
But do it first, right. And I don't think that's really the way callers live. I don't think it's really the way the average person lives today. We like to be friends with our neighbors, and if we do the right things at the right time for the right reasons, it's ethical. Ethical behavior, good or bad, can have far-reaching effects on you as a caller. If you do the right thing, even though at the time it may harm something, in the long run it will be the right thing. A club forms in your neighborhood that you really don't want to see formed in your neighborhood, but you sit back and let it go. If there is a need for that club, it will exist. If there's not a need for that club, it will go its own way and usually disappear. If a caller in your neighborhood comes in and is maybe not as ethical as he should be, but you try to be friends with him and keep him afloat, you're doing the ethical thing. And if he continues to be not ethical, you will find they will disappear. It takes time, but good ethics usually wins out. CALLERLAB was called upon to produce a means of rating callers and so forth, and provide a system of accreditation. But it only come out with one thing, is that callers must behave in an ethical manner towards one another. That's the best thing they could find to judge a caller on, was by his ethical performances. So John here has the rules of the ethics committee, and I think he's going to go over them, sort of. So we have an obligation as callers to live by the standards of CALLERLAB, and we have an ethical setup for callers. We also have a Bill of Rights for dancers, and between those two, it teaches us to teach our dancers to be ethical and to keep us ethical. And if you can imbibe is not the right word, infuse your dancers with our code for dancers and let them know that you're an ethical caller and all the things and the way you live, not just behind the mic, but when you're off the mic, when you meet people on the street, and how you are to your neighbor and this type of thing. Because believe me, if you do anything unethical, like for instance not paying for something, it gets around. We have had a few callers who bought equipment and never paid their bills and things like that, and we have a few callers who have done some strange things over the years. But strangely enough, those people disappear. So being ethical saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of worry. Try to be professional in what you do. And being professional means being ethical. So I've had my say. I'm going to turn this over to John. Bill said he wanted to be the last one.
He's going to have a long time to talk because I'm not going to be long. When Martin said that the early thing that CALLERLAB agreed upon was ethics. 1974, we had 110 callers and their partners in St. Louis Marriott for the first CALLERLAB convention. And we started talking about what things does a caller need to have, what things does a caller need to do. The only thing they agreed on, was the fact that a caller must have integrity, must have some standard of ethical behavior. And then they started to figure out, okay, what are we talking about as far as the ethical behavior? Well, it's an obligation that we have as a caller to the dancers. I don't think there's a question in the world that we have the obligation to the dancers. If there were no dancers, there'd be no need for callers. What a frightful thought that is to somebody who wants to make a profession out of calling. But at the same point in time, we see instances where individuals are not ethical in dealing with the dancers. You have an obligation to the club organizations. I don't think there's a question, again, as to the fact that in many areas, clubs are over-organized, and there's a lot more over-organization that needs to be done. But if that's what it is in your area, you have an obligation to support that standard. And you need to support that organization and the organization of clubs. You have an obligation to the profession. We often say we have to teach somebody how to be a square dancer, and we have to teach them how to square dance. Well, similarly, as a caller, we have an obligation to teach someone how to call, but we have an obligation to teach them how to be a caller. And they're not synonymous. And we have to deal with those obligations in a different fashion. We can talk about making contracts. We can talk about making and honoring all contracts. But we also have to recognize that the people in the square dance clubs don't always treat us the same way as they want us to treat them. As an example, I was asked one time from one of my dancers, said, "How are you going to be two places at one time?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, such and such a club says you're the caller that night, and you say you're going to be here in our club." I said, "I am. I don't have a contract with them." Well, what had happened was it took me 3 days to get in touch with the club president. And I said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't have a contract with you, but you're advertising by calling the dance. We were hoping that you wouldn't find out." That, to me, is a little bit unethical. They wanted to use my name as the draw, and yet they knew they had no contract with me because I was too expensive for them, and they said they couldn't afford that. And I said, "Fine. I'll give you a special one-time rate." "It was still too much." I said, "Okay, then I don't have a contract." "That's right, you don't have a contract." But they let the thing go out because they wanted to get more dancers that way. I'm sorry, but that's unethical. Needless to say, I have not called for that club, and I will not call for that club because I will not deal with somebody who's going to be that way. We have an obligation to continue for professional growth. We can't just sit there and say, "Well, heck, I've been calling X number of years now." And at the caller training session, I was reminded that there is a difference between a caller who's been calling for 30 years and a one-year caller who's done it 30 times. And that difference is the fact that one guy has continued his professional growth. And we have an obligation to do that. We're not just a flash in the pan. We're not just a one-time Charlie. We're going to go through and we're going to continue to study and continue to maintain our currency in the profession of square dance calling. You conduct yourself in a professional manner. You don't tell jokes on the microphone that are off color. You don't use swear words on the microphone because you're a professional and you have to act accordingly. When Martin said that ethics is doing what is right when nobody's looking, I think is true. In IBM, one of the things that they said was that if you do what you think is right for the customer, there's probably a policy to cover it. Well, that's ethics too, isn't it? Because if we do what is right, what indeed is right for the clubs, what is right for the dancer, what is right for the organizational structure in the area, that's a matter of ethical behavior. And we've all had items where we've seen people operate unethically. I submit to you that if you have a callers association, the subject of ethics is an appropriate topic for a workshop. And what would be examples of good ethics? What would be examples of poor ethics? And in a business-like way, Martin said that Bill is one of the most professional and most ethical vendors he has ever seen, and I think it's true. I've never heard any bad instances at all about Bill Heyman and his ethical dealing with people. He has always gone overboard to be totally and completely ethical. And that's one of the reasons I always liked working with Bill. Except in extreme emergencies, and here's the kind of question I think is important to discuss at a callers meeting. What do you do if you find that you somehow double booked? Anybody ever double book? Some people do it intentionally, and then they take the more lucrative contract. Is that ethical? To me, it is not. Have I ever double booked? Not intentionally. Have I ever double booked? Yes. What do you do when you find that you've double booked? You call them, don't you? You call the people up and say, hey, I got a problem. I found that I am double booked on thus and such a date. I signed the contract with you first, or I signed the contract with the other people first. Do you have a problem if we switch dates? And I submit to you that most of the time, dance leaders and dance clubs, you guys have to keep moving because Tom moved in. Is that what's going on down there? Okay. Is that section of floor load tested there, Tom? Yeah, it is when you're good friends like that. Okay. We used to be, right? Okay. I think if you have a situation where you're double booked, you have to resolve the issue rather than just be a no-show at one of those two places. Most of the time, you can get out of it relatively gracefully if you know when you signed a contract. Not too long ago, a situation occurred, which in respect I think was kind of amusing. We invited a caller to spend the night with us because they were calling a dance in the New Jersey area. And the caller's comment was, oh, man, am I glad you called. I had forgotten all about that. I hadn't written it down. Uh-oh. As it turns out, there was not a problem with it. He had the date open, and he just had neglected to write it down. But the point being that if we write down our contracts, we keep a file of our contracts, then we have an obligation to keep those contracts. And if for something that comes up and that you cannot make a dance, and that can happen too, then it's incumbent upon you to notify the club as quickly as you can so that they have as much time to get another caller. Now again, let me cite sometimes when things happen that surprise you. And again, this would be from personal experience. I was unable to make a dance, and I explained this to the club, and they said, fine. They said, will you get us another caller? I said, yes. So I got another caller to book. They said, we don't like that caller. Now what do I do? If they don't tell me ahead of time that there's a certain caller they don't want to get, they're going to take potluck, aren't they? I think they are, because I did what I thought was the right thing. I got them another caller to call the dance of a caller that I considered to be capable to call the same kind of dance that I would have called. And that, to me, is what ethics is all about. If that caller is not acceptable to them, they have an obligation to me to tell me ahead of time before I go and make a commitment. And I think that's what is important. We're trying to deal with people on an ethical basis of saying, do what is right. And if you do what is right, you can do so with a clear conscience. And if you do what is wrong, you're probably going to have to figure out a way to get out of that. So that, I think, is part of what we're talking about, too. Are there emergencies which sometimes come up? Sure there are. In those situations, you want to give as much lead time as you possibly can to the club for whom you've contracted. So you try to do that. There's one other thing on the Code of Ethics, which is Bill is going to talk about later on. It starts out said that I will only perform music which has been obtained in a manner which properly and completely encompasses the artists and the producers responsible for its creation. I will not enable others to make copies of my music while I retain my ownership. And Bill's going to talk about that to a greater extent, but that is the 9th item that we added to our Code of Ethics. And we have a current Code of Ethics for each of you here if you'd like it as a handout. But the obligations to the dancer, to the clubs, to the profession, to each other, all of those things are part of our ethical background and the things that we must do as callers. And I could say callers and cuers. But we have an obligation to do that. An obligation means a binding commitment, and you cannot do it any other way. Are there examples of bad ethics and good ethics? Sure. Can you create hypothetical situations and discuss it? Not everything is black and white, but to me, ethics is pretty close to being black and white. The obligation is a critical word. Obligation. And I think as callers and cuers, we have to remember that we are not operating as the star or the superstar. The dancer is the important part of the activity and will always be that. We as callers are privileged to be the callers for such an organization and such a group, but we have obligations that go with that privilege.
Thank you, John. I can't add any more to that other than to say one line. We are obligated to be prepared for our dancers. You cannot wing your way through life, so don't wing your way through a dance. Plan them, make them organized for the level you want, for the capability of the dancers you're calling to. Yes, I know sometimes you go out to a club and they've told you they can all dance plus. You get there and you say, load the boat, they sink it. And you're sort of left with your mouth hanging open. I have a saying, you should prepare 4 programs. The one you plan to call, the one you should have called, the one your wife wants you to call, and anything else that you think might happen. So you need 4 programs when you go out to make a dance. And that's the ethical thing to do.
Yeah, that brings up a point I meant to mention. What do you do as a caller when you go to a dance and you're supposed to call a plus dance? Just before the dance starts, the club president came up to you and said, oh, by the way, we have our class members with us tonight, so please just call mainstream. What do? You just call mainstream? And do you make the announcement? Or do you say, here's the microphone, you tell the club? I think that's a legitimate question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I don't want to be the one to have to tell the club that I'm only going to call mainstream because you guys thought you're coming here to hear me call a plus dance. And yet, your obligation to the club is to try to do what the club wants, isn't it? What's the right thing? I solicit your opinions. Anybody want to comment or address the issue? We'll put you on the microphone if you do. Hey, Randy.
Randy Doherty from Mesa, Arizona. I just did this dance last Saturday. Went up to a little town up in the mountains, and it was supposed to be a plus dance. They had 5 squares, and the president came over and said, we have a couple of our new dancers here. That one and that one. 2 people out of a whole season of classes. So I warmed them up with mainstream because most of the plus people would be warming up anyway. And when the lady rested, I tried to find out, you know, I could sneak in a ping pong. I snuck in a load the boat and a teacup, and most of them kept going. But every time those 2 people got up, I made sure I did pretty much just mainstream. And so about the 5th tip of the evening, she was resting again, and I said, we're going to make this a plus tip. So I announced it. And the first thing I did was try it out, relay the deucey with the boys on the end, normal arrangement. 3 squares were up that time, and I lost all 3 squares when I announced that I was going to do a plus tip. So they had a good dance. They got me booked back 4 or 5 times over the next couple of years. But you go there, you're really not. You're wondering, what are they thinking when they call themselves a plus group? So I didn't really answer your question, but that's a comment from my part.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Jerry?
Yes. Jerry Helt from Cincinnati, Ohio. At one time in the early days of CALLERLAB, there was a big issue by the Ethics Committee, and when it was sort of formed, that it was a big deal about somebody wearing their shirt unbuttoned all the way down, and this was unethical to do. Now, does this still hold true? My question is, do the ethics change as we change?
I think I understand the question. Yeah, I think my answer would be, I don't think ethics changes. I think costume requirements may change. There was a caller not too long ago who said that he went to a dance and he was told his wife couldn't dance because she was wearing a prairie skirt. Well, to me, a prairie skirt is a part of square dance attire. Certainly, it's appropriate square dance attire. But to that club, it was not. As a caller, and you were told that your wife couldn't dance because she was wearing a prairie skirt, what would you do? To me, fold up your equipment and say, get somebody to call your dance. I don't know. I don't think the ethics changes, Jerry. I think that the requirement of appropriate attire may change, but I think it's a local thing. Oh, I don't think I would call square dance attire ethics, would I? That's etiquette, yeah. Yeah, that's part of etiquette. I think Freddie's right there. Roy, do you have a comment?
Roy Gotta from New Jersey. Getting back to the previous issue about who tells the club that the program has been changed, what Betsy does is she'll make the announcement, but she'll say, the club has informed me that we are changing the program to this, so that people know that she's not the one who's made the decision, and it also lets them know that if they have a complaint, you know, where they can take it without actually, you know, it's in a positive manner, and a lot of times the club president doesn't want to be on the microphone and do that. So she just says, the club has informed me that because of this, we're going to do this evening.
Thank you. Anybody else have a comment or question?
Wendy Vandermeulen from Ottawa, Canada, and I have a voice session at 2, so quick question, quick answer, hopefully. When you mentioned that about the ethics things with the guy that used your name on the flyer, and you won't call for that club because you don't like their ethics, the question then is, I as a caller would also be tempted to say, I don't want to call for that club because of the ethics. So when does things that are good for you, like when things that you treat as ethical, like obviously, is that club still dancing? So they still have callers calling for them. They still have callers come to their dance. Are the other callers that call for them then being unethical because they're supporting an unethical group?
I would say that my obligation to the other people is not to tell them that that happened, number one. It's not my business to tell them who they should deal with and who they should not deal with. If the club is still dancing and they get callers, I have no problem with the callers that are hired by them. but I personally wouldn't do it. And if I'm asked directly, I'll answer them. But I don't think I would go out and advertise it. I wouldn't deal with that club if I were you because they're unethical. I don't know. Does that answer your question? Okay. Tommy, you got a comment? Good. Keep it that way. Oh, sorry.
I had much the same thing as happened to Randy. Quite a few years ago, I was hired to do an evening dance, and I was told by the caller that they could dance anything in plus in any manner. So I went up there loaded for bear. I got a bunch of rabbits. As I found out after the first tip that their caller never stacked his calls. I could not call one move from plus, follow it with another move by plus. If I was going to use a plus move, I followed it by a bunch of mainstream. Or if I was going to work into a plus move, I loaded with mainstream before I dropped it on them. But that was a valuable lesson. Don't listen to the caller that's taught them. Be very careful when you take your first tip. The ethical thing to do, if you'll pardon the expression, is to feel that floor and find out what they can dance. Call a little bit of tough mainstream. And if they flounder on it, you know you're going to have some troubles. But don't do it the first tip. I could not get that floor back together for the whole evening. They were mad at me from the first tip because their caller had told them they were full plus dancers. Here's Bill.
Thank you very much, Martin. Just one quick anecdote, and then I'll jump into the items that I had prepared. Probably about 1989 or so, I had done 4 or 5 St. Patrick's Day dances for a Catholic youth group. Changes fade to black. There was a Sunday afternoon where we came home late from an event. I don't know if it was a square dance event or whatever. We were away for a weekend, I think, doing family stuff. 5:30, I said, I'm taking an early shower tonight. I am exhausted. So 5:30, 6 o'clock, we grabbed some supper at home. I'm lying in bed there watching TV, and here's all I hear. Darling, the telephone rings. Peggy answers the phone. Yes, Father Tom, he's right here. I had forgotten. I hadn't looked because I had been away for the weekend. My obligation to follow my calendar. I'd just forgotten to look in the calendar. The date had been booked a year ago. It wasn't a last-minute thing, no double booking or anything. But there I am, all ready for Betty Bye, and there were, 22 teenagers over at the Catholic Church, about 40 minutes away over in Hawthorne, ready, waiting for me to call. And I was red right back up and over the top of my bald spot. I said, I can be there in about 20 minutes. I'll get there. He said, no, it's okay, Bill. We understand. I said, I am so embarrassed. He said, no, I've already pulled out a video, and they're watching video, and we'll do. They met weekly anyway. I said, well, if you give me another makeup date, I would love to call the dance. And I was getting a very nice full fee, as a matter of fact. And I said, well, then I pay penance. I will call the dance for free, but I'd like the funds to come out of your budget anyway, and I would like to give it to the kids to do with what they would like to do. They can have a pizza party or a hamburger party or do whatever they want to do. 2 weeks later, the appointed time, needless to say, I arrived in plenty of time for the dance. Kids were there. They were very appreciative. First thing I did was stood up, make the obligatory apology, told them how stunningly embarrassed I was and that the price of penance that I'm going to pay is I'm giving up my fee tonight. It's my gift to you to make up from what was clearly my oversight. And Father Tom asked the leader of the group to come up and announce they had decided instead of having a party selfishly for themselves, they were going to give this money to the Home for Unwed Mothers that was in the area. So my ethical and moral act, because obviously I was the one at fault, I paid my price, and instead of them just chunking down on pizza and ice cream or whatever else they could have done with all that money, instead they chose to pass it on for a good deed. It was very rewarding. I believe the phrase is pass it forward. And there was just a wonderful local example of a Catholic youth group who really had the right idea. I had the right idea to apologize, make my sacrifice, and they, rather than taking advantage of that, passed that money on. And that that was a double winner that night. Despite the embarrassment, it was in fact a great experience. And the fact that that was 12 years ago or whatever, it's more than 12 years ago, it's 17 years ago, I do remember it, and that has always stuck with me on things like that. Jerry Junk was originally supposed to be on this panel, and one of the things that he said when he wrote his original memo to John and myself was, let's be ladies and gentlemen. And a note I wrote at that time was, whatever happened to basic respect for people's rights and their property in our society, not just in square dancing. This is a societal issue. What happened to just that common decency that our grandparents and our parents taught us, that we obviously have taught our children? Where is all of this disrespect coming from? Many of you who know me know, in many respects, I'm really a very simple guy, and I'm so fundamental in those kinds of things. It's so stunningly obvious to me what the right thing is. It's just second nature. My parents taught us. Peggy's parents taught her. And when people don't behave that way, I don't even know what to say. My jaw literally does drop. I'm going to say some things today that may be somewhat shocking. The fact that you were in this room means, by definition, none of you are guilty of any of the things that I'm going to comment about. Because if you were guilty, you wouldn't walk into an ethics and etiquette session, and I understand that. So please take my comments in the generic and structural sense. I mean them all in a constructive way. I mean no personal affront. And in one particular case, I mean no organizational affront, because I am going to address each of the national square and round dance organizations and offer some challenges to them in a polite and respectful way. But I have some thoughts on things. I would like to stay focused right now exclusively on the issue of illegal music usage. Elmer and Margie Sheffield took the time to come specifically, among other things, to talk about that issue. Very eloquently stated this morning. Elmer took the high ground. I'm going a little bit more towards the middle ground. I'm going to get a little bit meatier on this thing and be very specific. When Peggy and I were responsible for dosado.com, which now Tom and Pam have accepted that responsibility, I posted articles there. I sent out 4,000 emails or whatever on illegal music copying. I was the owner of Handhurst Tape Service at that time. We sent out to our subscribers on numerous occasions, and many, if not most of you in this room are subscribers. You know those notices that were coming through, reminding not only that you don't illegally copy music or share it, but that you remind your friends that it's not a legal and moral practice. And despite all of that, illegal music copying, sharing, piracy, call it whatever you want, has put the square dance music production industry right on the cusp of extinction. And I am not being dramatic about that. Trust me, Tom Dillander and I have chatted about this for hours since he acquired our company. We've talked for hours. Elmer and I, over the past 15 or whatever years, have talked about those issues, and I've obviously discussed it with other producers. Most of the producers do not expect to actually make money. They're certainly entitled to make money for their economic risk, the time investment, and so forth. But at the very least, they'd like to get their investment back, and that's certainly at a minimal level a fair request. If they could at least get a little bit of return on their invested capital, both cash and human resources of their time, that would be even better. If the callers of the world continue to steal the music, and it is theft, there will be no new music, period. It's the end of that. When Peggy and I first acquired Handhurst, a big seller in the first 25 days, which is the way we used to measure it from the day the tape came out until I announced it on the next tape when we did the statistics, a really big seller was 1,400, 1,200, 1,800, sometimes even more than that, but generally 1,400 to 1,500 wasn't all so unusual. At the point that I sold the company to Tom and Pam, I don't think we ever had a bestseller over 180. And when you saw the top five is a bit of a misnomer. That was from 160 or 130 down to 27. There were months when the number 5 bestseller was selling 20 or 30 copies. That is a horrific circumstance. If you go to what I'll call the full Nashville band complement, and you rent your band, as a couple of the labels do, in very simple terms, you're talking $800 a tune to record it. And the cost of that music runs down through folks such as Elmer, who happens to have spent $1 bazillion on his own in-house studio, has a staff band that play every whatever night it is, Monday night or whatever, and they've been playing for you for 18 or 20 or whatever number of years it is now, and they're on payroll. They're getting paid for picking. And it runs right down to those several producers who, frankly, have a keyboard at home and do it themselves. And it's that whole spectrum. Obviously, their cost is much lower. No matter where the producer is on that spectrum, they expect some fair form of return on their money. I understand that those of you in this room are not the people who are stealing the music. The stealing is also multiplied because, could I have a show of hands? How many of you have gone into your grocery store for the last 20 years 3 times a week and stolen something? Any hands? Just for the record, there were no hands showing. Tom is raising his only to be funny. But nobody in this room has ever stolen anything from a grocery store. We pay our bill when we walk out. If you have a piece of illegal music and you're using it 3 times a week or 4 times a week or 5 times a week, you're stealing each and every time. It is just simply theft. And I know this is a sort of ugly kind of thing to put on the tape, but I'm just telling it like it is. Because I think that with all of the good intent that all of the committees and all of the dancer committees and all of the not-for-profits in this industry, all the hard work they're doing, if the music goes away, to a great extent, it's sort of all for naught. You've really wasted decades of hard work and good spirit and good intent by allowing the music component of your industry to die. The vendors will die, the producers will die, the callers will go away, and the clubs are going to not have new music to play with. One of the joys of going to a dance is not hearing the same 10 tunes every night. I mean, how boring is that? I hope you're not in one of those clubs where the caller doesn't buy music and you have to listen to the same tunes all the time. That's just horrific. So here's my challenge. I'm going to address each of the national organizations. I am not making any accusations. These are challenges of encouragement. I do believe that each of these organizations has already begun to really do the right thing. I think the hearts of these organizations are all in the right spot, and I want to move it perhaps to the next step. CALLERLAB, that paragraph 9 on there about the illegal use of music, to take it very seriously, not just at a board level, but A, make sure that no board member is in violation of this illegal use of music. That would be a real travesty. That the members of CALLERLAB as an organization take it upon themselves to police the music. They're around. I mean, folks, if you've been in a music festival and walked into a caller's lounge in Germany or Florida or California or Las Vegas and all that, especially the national traveling callers, they know what goes on in those lounges. There's a lot of music swapping going on there. And it's not just national callers, it's not just local callers, it's sort of a mix of a lot of folk who are doing it. And if you see that happening, you got to step up and you got to have the courage to say, this really has to stop. It's difficult to do. I'm not suggesting this is an easy thing. So CALLERLAB, I think, can make a further concerted effort. This paragraph 9 in the Code of Ethics has been on 3 years, I believe now, something like that. It has to be watched by CALLERLAB and more carefully policed. To my friends at RoundaLab, the level of illegal music usage in the round dance community in general is epidemic. It's even worse in the clogging community, I might add. It is epidemic, and that is shown statistically by the precipitous drop in sales of round dance music that is published by round dance producers and square end round dance producers. It's really dropped significantly. It's not just because dancing in general is down. We understand there are population issues and fewer cuers. I understand all of that. But it is down because the theft is rampant. I know cuers who steal music. I know callers who steal music too, by the way. It's not just the cuers here. But I think that Round-A-Lab can really take a continuing leadership position to make it a part of their official policy to in some form adopt what I'll call paragraph 9 in whatever form it's appropriate for Round-A-Lab, to adopt that kind of policy officially if it's not already in, and I honestly don't know, and to really, really police their professional community so that they're in compliance with it. To the NEC, I was on the executive committee of the National Association of Square and Round Dance Suppliers for, I think, 12 or 13 years or whatever it was. A number of those years I was the ethics committee chairman. I was the ethics committee chairman in 1987 in Houston. For those of you who are there know what that means. The NEC has been fighting the problem, and the local committees, the city committees, have been fighting the problem of illegal sales throughout the convention rather than just inside the sales booth area, and that is a problem that the NEC and local committees have really seriously tried to address in ways that I think have been very, very constructive. The one area where it has consistently continued to be a problem is in the round dance halls. There are cuers handing out cue sheets there. It's in the syllabus. And the content in the syllabus at the top says, get this mini disc from cuer X, Y, or Z. If they have written the music, theoretically that's perfectly acceptable. However, at the Square Dance Convention, that's actually not legal because it's by regulation of the convention not acceptable to sell music outside. If it's their personal music that they've created and they are vending it individually outside the convention, that's absolutely legitimate. No challenge there at all. The reality is, from reviewing past syllabi, I believe it is, you will see that, in fact, most of that music is not original music. It's well-known titles and pop tunes, and a lot of that is just simply pirated music by any other name. Use whatever name you want. And that is a serious crime. The piracy of music, piracy being different than sharing. Piracy is the actual copying of somebody else's mechanical recording, physical recording. Huge difference. Piracy is step out of the car, look at the FBI badge, and that's like serious crime. So I would ask the NEC to pay additional attention as time goes on to really try and stop this kind of abuse in any of the rooms. Round dance is one I've cited. I'm sure that you could possibly find it in the clogging rooms too. I don't know that for a fact, but I suspect it's true. The producers, they're worried about the drop in sales. First question I'm going to ask is every producer, him or herself, personally using all legally purchased, legally licensed music? Okay, it's a fair question. Second question I'm asking, I'm an equal opportunity commenter here. The second question I ask is, each producer should ask each of their staff members whether they are full-time staff members or what I'll call pay. There are some what we call pay-on labels where the caller pays to go on the label. He pays for the production of the recording. And to me, that's the equivalent of being on the staff of the label. Are the pay-on artists, the vanity artists, are they also in compliance? Last big item is buying music online. There are a number of vendors who've suddenly cropped up, and they're selling Square and or round dance music online. MP3s, buy from me. I'll make a very simple statement. I and Tom Dillander know more about music licensing than anybody around here. Between us, we have gotten thousands of licenses. We know the people inside the Harry Fox agency personally. We talk to them often enough over the years, although in the last year I've had the pleasure of not being involved in that. But we know all of them. I know the director of Internet Licensing at BMI. We know all these people. We have spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours creating software to be compliant. We have spent time getting licenses for all of the MP3s that are sold by Tom's company. I personally have gotten over 1,200 MP3 licenses for producers for that music. If you are buying your music online, make certain that the music you are buying is A, legally licensed, and that if there are samples being played online, that the person who owns that website is paying BMI performance fees, not their calling license, BMI internet performance fees for playing that music online in small samples. It's due. And BMI does know who's out there, just so you know. They do know who's out there. But Hanhurst Palomino pays annual fees to have that music online. That is an expense. That's an operating expense of running the business. It also takes hours of software creation, in my case, and compliance to do all that reporting and bookkeeping on their end to make sure that all of those things are properly done. So if you're planning to buy some music online from a Square Around Dance vendor, do ask the question whether or not that music is legally licensed. If I could ask the following people to stand up, and I promise it's a good thing. Could I ask Jim Mayo to stand up, please, and just stay standing? Jerry Hill, could I ask you to stand up? Lee and Barbie Ashwell, could I ask you to stand up? And Gene Triplett, could I ask you to stand up? Jim, one of the founders of CALLERLAB, writer of many of the documents in CALLERLAB, a person of the highest moral standing. Jerry, same attributes. Nobody's ever questioned how Jerry has behaved in the market, how he's lived his life. Lee and Barbie Ashwell, I met them at the first Portland convention, assistant business chairs, I believe you were. Immediately fell in love with both of them, and I suspect that they might have fallen in love with Peggy at the time also. The reality is that they had very, very high standards. They're business people. They understand what's going on. They deal decently with people. They are polite. They are respectful. They're understanding. They're constructive. Gene and Connie happens not to be here, met you guys at the first Charlotte convention. Set a whole new standard for how general chairman of conventions can work. I still remember the question when I asked you, well, are you publishing your financial figures? And I know you know that conversation, because it had always been an issue that convention committees were not, that the money was questionable. Where is the money going? And the answer was, it was public in the next available publication. Those financial statements were published. If you ever wonder yourself, and I'm speaking to the people on the tape now, if you ever wonder to yourself whether something's right or wrong, not just in music copying or otherwise, just look at these folks who I've asked to graciously stand up and think how they would behave and how they would respond, and that their behavior is exactly the way all of us should be thinking. Could I ask you all to give them all a big hand? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I think we still have a few minutes. Am I right, John?
Yes.
We'll open it up for general questions from the floor. Jerry? You can run the mic. John?
I have a question on changing format. My name is Jerry Helt, Cincinnati, Ohio. If you change format with the music, what are the legalities on that?
Thank you, Jerry. That's a great question. It was touched on by Elmer this morning. He gave his personal answer. It also happens to be the completely correct legal compliance answer. When you buy a piece of music in any media format from the legally authorized vendor, okay? Doesn't matter who it is, as long as they have the mechanical license to have produced that music, you then can perform that music with your BMI ASCAP performance license, gotten through CALLERLAB, anywhere in the context of a square dance. You may also reformat, change keys, copy to different formats in any combination or permutation on that one license as long as it's for your use. That doesn't mean you can't do a duet. Where it goes illegal is where you give away or sell any one of the A, original copies, or B, any of the iterations of that, any of the copies that were made. If you are working either digitally on a computer, mini disc, whatever it might be, if you want to have one in the key of G, one in the key of F, one with Kathy singing along in harmony with you, one with Joe, your other favorite caller, singing in harmony, you can have all of those as different tracks on your mini disc or computer and use them any way you want. You are covered by the license, but it was the original receipt and possession of the first format that is actually your license. I'm going to run the mic to the back. Heading back to Roy Gotta from New Jersey.
Okay, since I don't have to introduce myself, a couple of things. And one of the things you just said where you could copy, use whatever format, as long as you didn't give away or sell any of those copies of the original. Actually, in my understanding, you could give away the original, but then you could no longer use any of your copies because then you would have in your possession an illegal copy. The thing that's opened up with the internet, and I'm just making sure I'm clear on this because I've talked with several people, I think including Tom, but you'll see this is more for the round dancing since you brought that up. You'll see on cue sheets music available from the choreographer. And in the past that was just illegal. There are instances where it is legal. In other words, if I have a tune that is available over the internet, if I download and pay for 100 copies of that, then I could, I would have to have 100 receipts. Now that's changed. That's why I'm asking.
Tom Dilder from Kentucky. The way the law states it, you can purchase 100 copies. You can own 100 copies. You can't give any of those away. You can't sell those. They're yours. That's the law. You're allowed to make a copy of something you purchased for your own private use only. There is a big run right now in the round dance world, since you brought it up. Choreographer says MP3 downloaded and purchased and paid for by, you can get one of these from so-and-so. That's 100% illegal. They can put on the cue sheet, this song is available for download from www, whatever source it is, whatever commercial company has paid the royalties and the mechanicals to sell you that song. But it is 100% illegal for anybody to download more than one copy or any copies and give them away or sell them. 100%.
Then I just have one more question that I guess I would ask you to research perhaps. What would be the difference if, let's say, you gave me $10 and asked me to go to Sam Goody's and buy you a CD of Winona Judd? Okay, and that would be nothing wrong with that. I could take your money, go to the store, and give it to you. Let's say you don't have a computer and you give me $2 and ask me to download something for you.
I'm not sure I can answer that. I'll check it, but I'm going to guess that the way the internet is set up, you purchased it if you brought it down on your computer. It's only yours.
There's actually even a simpler answer since we've gotten so many licenses. The license is Bill Heyman again. The licenses that we get are called DPDs, Digital Phono Download. It is not legal for the vendor who got that license to copy that MP3 onto a CD, a physical media, or a mini disc for that matter, and sell that. The license only applies to the music in its downloadable format. For you to transmit that copy 2 through 100 to the other person, you have no way to get that to them physically. What, are you going to put it on a CD? You don't have the right to make the CD. And by the way, neither does the vendor. I mean, there's no difference between us. Even you as the buyer, I didn't and Tom doesn't have the right to copy that on a CD and hand it. That question has come up particularly in Europe where somebody had a problem with a download or something. Can you send me a CD of that? The answer is, with greatest apologies, no, I can't legally. I can't legally. We've tried other email addresses, but anyway, thanks.
And it's just not, no, this Tom again, it's not just the downloads that are in this, if you want to call it a dilemma. I have had many a conversation with Harry Fox in regards to schools call me and say, hey, we'd like to have this album that you have, but we don't have turntables anymore. Can you send it to me on a CD? Can you put it on a CD and send it to me? Legally, I can't do that. I can't even acquire a license to copy that. They say, we'll buy the LP. I legally cannot copy that over to a CD and even send them the LP and the CD both. You think, well, hey, as long as you send them the LP and the CD, you're okay. No, I can't acquire a license for that. And trust me, I spent thousands of dollars, and I know Bill spent money and time trying to get them to change that. It's not going to happen.
I'm having Jim Mayo here. I'm having trouble with the distinction between the old days of hard copies. When I went to the store and bought 100 copies of something, I could give them to my friends. If I bought 100 copies of an MP3 download, can I give that MP3, you know, if I paid you for 100 copies of an MP3 instead of just one, could I then transfer 99 of those to my friends?
No, because how are you going to transfer it to your 2nd through 99th friend? Physically. What? But you don't have the download authority for that. You bought that for your use. I mean, it's something that Tom can look into, but...
Well, then I can't buy 100 of them.
That is correct. Yeah, yes.
Not purchasable in multiple
forms. Unless you made an arrangement with the owner of the music and got the right to do that, the right to copy them.
Well, he's my dealer.
No, but he doesn't have the right. He only has the right to sell the one with the royalties going to writer and publisher, etc. I mean, he pays per download.
The digital copy is very different from the
yes, it is.
Copy.
It is, and he pays, unlike the physical copy, he pays per download. He's paying per click. Literally, every time he sells an MP3 online, there is a statistical process.
Hopefully that's a work in progress.
HFA1, HFA2, and HFA3.
Right, but the point he's trying to make, yes, you could physically purchase them. I won't know necessarily that you bought a copy today and tomorrow you buy another copy and the next day you buy another. You can do that physically. But they're in your computer, you're stuck with them. You can't legally give them to anybody else or sell them to anybody else. They're yours. And by law, they're not even yours to give away. I know, it is different. Right, because in the old days, you could buy 100 records and you could give them away to friends. That's still legal.
Tom Miller from Pennsylvania. Just a quick story what happened with the Internet and how things work. A really, really good friend of mine, some of you might know him, Bill Harrison, of course had a CD that he was out promoting his dances and so forth. Bill knows the story. One of the songs that was on the CD was Dream On Texas Ladies, which was recorded on Global. Billy had went to Doug Bennett and got the permission, and Doug gave him the permission to put Dream On Texas Ladies on his CD. The original artist, or the publisher, thank you, who wrote that song, just went in and typed in, evidently, Dream On Texas Ladies, and right away Billy's website came up, and it shot him right to his web page that he had the song titles. It was a few short days later that Billy received a letter from the publisher of this song that was going to sue Billy for over $10,000 because he did not have permission from this publisher of putting this song on his CD, even though Billy did have the permission from Doug Bennett from Global Music. It kind of really scared Billy. He was on the phone, I know, with Bill, and I know he talked to Junior about it. And what Billy had to do was, to make it work, they had to go to Harry Fox and buy a license for that particular song and send proof to the publisher that he did purchase a license to use that particular song. So if you go to Billy's website now, you'll see no listings of any CDs
whatsoever. That was completely taken off of his web page, because as soon as they typed in a song, it went right to his web page. So there's a good example, even if you have permission from the producer that initially got the license from Harry Fox, you just can't, it just can't pass on. So that's really a good example right there.
Thank you. Simply said, it's not his to pass on. The other thing I'll just mention, not just all search engines, but Google in particular, you can't hide if it's on your website. Google hits my website, the Supreme Audio website, over 1,000 times a month. We have a bot counter on there. It's over 1,000 times a month there on my website. So if there's something on that website, it happens not to be music, it's audio equipment, but if there's something on there that I don't want the public to see, big mistake. Yeah, big mistake. Oh, sorry. Can you tell everybody the pricing of the license for Harry Fox? Oh, sure. Why don't you do that? Yeah.
In today's environment, it's approximately 8 cents per unit. It just went up. I think it's 8.5 actually now. The minimum buy is 500 units, whether you want to make 100 or 50. But the minimum license is that. Now that's per medium. If Elmer wants to cut a song, it costs him that much money to make the final. If he wants to put out the CD, he pays another license for the CD. If he wants it to be an MP3, there's another license to be paid for the MP3. It's per medium.
Randy Doherty, Mesa, Arizona. I want to commend Bill on his challenges to the national organizations, but do you foresee that CALLERLAB will become a policing type of organization where will we have any strength of telling these people that are doing those kinds of things that they're no longer members of our organization, or just what's going to happen?
I'll give a quick answer as Bill again as to how I understand it, and that is it's number 9 on the Code of Ethics. Therein lies the only biting power, if you will. It's not like, you know, you're going to get strung up legally. It's a violation of the Code of Ethics. And then you can get called before the Ethics Committee. And they will convene in Ethics Committees. You know, it's specially convened each time there's an incident like that. And that committee will determine or adjudicate what is the appropriate remedy for it. And I'm not suggesting there should be a standard remedy. I'm just simply saying that the organizations in general, Round-a-Lab, CALLERLAB, NEC, should heighten the awareness within their communities of the importance of these issues. And I think that the heightening of that awareness will be helpful. Do I leave this session thinking that it'll all be done? No, I really don't. I really don't. Lee?
Lee Asheville, Oregon. Bill, in your experience with getting licenses, I have no problem getting the contract with BMI ASCAP for a national convention and paying our just due. Can you tell me why we have to pay an additional cost every time we use the live band?
No. Honestly, I'm really not familiar with the live music side of that. Jerry?
I want to go back. I think to clarify what you were talking about, the 8 cents, that's a mechanical license. Right, yeah. Not to be confused with other licensing. Right. Mechanical.
Is this a situation, I'm Barbie Ashwell from Oregon. Is this a situation whereby if I'm at my local club dance, our local caller finds that there is a guest caller in the house, he wants to put him on stage, the guest caller didn't bring any music. So can he borrow the callers without being in problem?
The answer is, thank you. The answer is, without question, that's not the issue here. And you can, that's why I even said before you can do duets. That's why I made the comment there. No, that's not the intent of mechanical licensing.
Mike Oliveri, Northland, Colorado. My question, Bill, Tom, you guys can probably answer this. The new MP3 downloads, things like that, the enforcement, if ASCAP BMI was to come in and say, you know, I want to see your your music, how can they determine, I'm sure there's some type of coding that says you actually purchased that. Is that coding transferred when you, like if somebody was to copy the music, or is it strictly on the original, download?
I don't think I'm talking out of school unless Thomas done something different. We have not done any embedding. You can do data embedding in MP3s, so they go and it shows quote unquote where they came from. Tom can answer that, but the answer is no. Your proof of ownership is your sales receipt, or if you will, the vendor's records, but presumably your sales receipt. That's on February 2nd you bought 17 MP3s for whatever dollars, and that really is your license to use it.
Tom Dillner. When the internet buying spree started and the licensing came into place with Harry Fox and whatever, they originally intended for a tag to be put, a code to be put on every single MP3. They were going to track every download to every person in the world forever. That lasted about 90 days. Okay? It is now the vendor's responsibility to track it. I can tell, and Bill can tell, every single person we've sold an MP3 to, what it was, when we sold it to them, when we downloaded it to them. And that information is given to Harry Fox every 90 days. Not only that, we have to give the information to BMI and ASCAP. So they do not only know who we are, they know what we're doing.
Let me try to, Jermaine, to answer the question about the orchestra. And John, if you would monitor my statements here. It's my understanding that when we were first contacted by BMI and ASCAP, and they made clear that they were about to start policing the licensing in the square dance business, CALLERLAB and RoundaLab together entered into negotiations with BMI and ASCAP for a very unusual arrangement for licensing in our field. They licensed the performer instead of the place of performance. And at the same time, we negotiated with them that the license would cover callers working in a normal dance application. But when it came to regional or state festivals, the license was not adequate. Am I right so far, John? And we had quite a discussion with them about whether live music was a different element. And we did negotiate at that time that there would be an additional charge if live music was used in this setting. It was part of the overall negotiation that RoundaLab and CALLERLAB together made with those two organizations on behalf of the entire square dance activity. So the way they apply their licensing to other fields is very different from the way they apply it in our field. Am I accurate so far, John? John was the one who did most of the negotiation.
Thank you. And I was in New Jersey cheering him on. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
I'm just curious, are there any Canadians in the office? Okay. Our organization for licensing is very similar, only we go through a firm called SOCAN, Society of Organization of something or other. And it looks exactly the same way. We pay exactly the same fees under the same regulations as you people do. If we have a larger dance, we have to license the hall. If we hire an orchestra, we hire it by the piece, and each musician has to be a union member, and then we hire the orchestra according to the size of the orchestra, and the price for that orchestra varies on the size. If the orchestra happens to be 7 pieces and you only want 6, you take that 7th guy and put him off in a room and let him play by himself. We have done that once or twice to get the right fee, and they respect that. SOCAN has sort of backed away from us because we caused such a confusion in the music business over a period of about 6 months. They got tired of listening to us. But now we're on our honor with them to license and do the things that we have to do. Each caller is contacted every year. We get our license $63 a year is what it costs the caller to do it. If you have a special dance out of your normal venue, it's $53 for that hall for one night. If you have a weekend, you get charged 3 days. And if you have a national festival, and this is one that really blew my mind, one time they tried to charge us according to the room, number of dancers, and it was horrendous, $14,000 they wanted for this. And we got a lawyer on it, and we had to pay for 5 rooms at $53 apiece.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the board.
Tim Crawford. I just have a question that maybe you can answer. At home, and it has to do with mechanical licensing, so I think, but I'm not positive. At home in Canada, we have something called SIRPA, which is the Canadian Independent Record Producers Association. And I have a document from them that basically says, and this is relative to Tom's point about who actually owns the song. I have a document from them that says that if Elmer's company changes the score of the music, which you do, the owner of the song could be, I don't know, Rose Music, and then Elmer's band records, he pays a license fee to record the music, and he pays a fee to be a vendor or a seller of the music. But if the score is changed, then Elmer becomes the owner of it, and then so you seek the permission to reproduce that arrangement on a disc that you're going to sell from Elmer. That's not the same in the United States? Yes, it is. Then why did Bill have the problem?
Because he didn't have any license at all. When Tom goes to the Harry Fox website, he has a special piece of software. He doesn't go to the public website. He has separate software, and he looks at Dipsy Doodle Dandy. There are 9 versions of it there, with 9 different artists, 9 different publishers, for argument, or sometimes 3 of them are actually the same publisher, same artist, but different versions or different arrangements might have been in a different show. He has to pick which one of those arrangements he's actually licensing. So in that regard, it's, I believe, virtually identical. In Tom's case, in Billy's case, he didn't have any license. He had the verbal permission of a square dance music producer. And actually, that square dance music producer, and it doesn't matter who the individual was because it's really irrelevant, didn't have the authority to grant the use of the music because that music producer's use of the music for which he paid does not extend to a second or third party. Okay? Does that make any sense or not? It doesn't have to make sense. Elmer? It's me.
Elmer Sheffield. Bill, from what I understand, and I could be wrong too, but when we purchase a license to make a square dance tune out of a pop tune, of course they know we're making some changes, but the license is roughly $50 because, like Tom said, you got to buy 500. But callers call me and email me all the time wanting to do something with the song, and if it's my understanding that the license that I purchase only gives me permission to reproduce 500 of that whatever as a square. It does not make me become the owner of the song. I only own the square dance version, which didn't belong to me to start with because I paid a license to you know, and of course Tom knows, but Tony, years ago, before licenses come along, we just did tunes. You know, we heard Dipsy Doodle Dandy on the radio, and we went down to the studio and recorded it. But then the time came when the record pressing companies will not press a record without we have a license. But that license, like I say, as far as I know, only gives me permission to do it as a square dance song. It does not give me the song. I can't give it to you or sell it to you or whatever. I can produce square dance records and hope they're going to sell.
Oh, Shaw, Boise, Idaho. I'm going to give you an example and tell me if this is a good deal or a bad deal. We have a lot of callers, a lot of cuers that produce tapes, CDs, whichever. As they're traveling around, they sell those. I, as a purchaser, would assume that they have the rights to sell these. So I, as a round dance instructor, may be out there one night and I have a set of 4 couples that want to do a square. Is it possible for me to take one of these tapes, one of these CDs that this caller I have purchased from this caller, and put this on and let them dance a square to this CD?
No. Do not make that assumption. Do not make that assumption. I'm not saying don't do it, but don't make the assumption that you have a legal floor on which to stand, because I am going to suggest, no accusation, that the callers who are going around the country, whether they're national callers or regional, local, if I can describe them, please correct me if I'm wrong, the level of permission that they have is usually, hey, Tony, can I use Royal 203? Hey, Elmer, can I use ESP 705 on my thing? I want to do my version and give it out to my, sell it to my dancers for $15. That's usually the way it's been historically. The way things are going right now, that too may come to an end, because they don't have the legal right to do it. What Tony or any other producer is saying, I don't have objections to using that music, but none of these producers ever granted them the right to do mechanical reproduction. They never said that. And it depends on how it's phrased. But I think basically it'll be behind you and then.
So I'm sorry, Tim Crawford again. I'm sorry, I'm confused again about the mechanical licensing to reproduce is an issue that that I wouldn't have if I created a CD of 10 singing calls and I got permission from all these guys. I would fall into the same position that Bill Harrison ran into. Yet Elmer said he owns the square dance version. So, and I'm only using the square dance version. Okay, that's what I don't understand.
Elmer has purchased a mechanical license to go in and make a song in a studio and put it out on vinyl, CD, or MP3. His version. He owns the mechanical license for that format only. That's all he purchased. He still doesn't own the music. He doesn't own the copyright to it unless he wants to file for it and pay for it. He's not even the publisher of it unless he files that with Congress. Okay? He can do all those things, but he still doesn't have the right to give it to you and put it on any other format, even though you think it's his. It's his version, but he doesn't own the rights to give it away.
The only, as far as I know, the only thing we have, I mean, if we do a hoedown, okay, if it doesn't have, if it's not taken from a song, if we just sit there and we take a bunch of notes and different chords and we make a pad or record, we own that song. We have to have a copyright. You know, it's just like as if I'd have wrote a pop tune, you know. But we did, for instance, we did a hoedown a while back, and we used in the background what's that? Do Re Mi, is that the name? I thought that I could do what I want to with it. I immediately got a letter saying it's been determined that this song contains, and I had to buy a license for it. But we can get a copyright if it's an original boom chuck with whatever we decide to put in it.
That's actually what I was going to say. Was there a time before all of this BMI ASCAP thing came about and we actually negotiated some things about the way square dance callers use this stuff? The producers, if they didn't use a certain number of beats of that music, if they were doing an original, what I call square dance score of some song, it didn't use so many beats of the verses. If you know how square dance music now is today, it seems like we just use the same 32 and repeat it. 64 times and 7 times to make our singing call. Wasn't there a time when music, if they were doing an original, what I call a square dance score of some song, it didn't use so many beats of the verses? If you know how square dance music now is today, it seems like we just use the same 32 and repeat it 64 times and 7 times to make our singing call. Wasn't there a time when we weren't responsible if we didn't use a certain number of beats of the music?
No, actually, it's kind of like the old TV show. If you can name that song in 4 notes, it's a song.
Also, if you have public domain music, you record it. Let's say that Elmer records Turkey in the Straw, which is public domain. As soon as you record that, your arrangement, you can license or you pay for the license for that arrangement, and you own the arrangement. You don't own the tune, but you own the arrangement. Am I clear on that?
Tom Miller from Pennsylvania. I guess to kind of add on with Tim, to add on to it, I guess if Tim was to make a CD with 10 songs, and he was to go to Tony and Junior to do 5 of each one, or 5 of Royal or 5 of ESP, the right thing to do would be is to get a license for each one of those songs, and then you could sell up to 500 copies. Then that would solve the problem. Then I think in that degree, then you would have to put that on your CD where the license and so forth. But that's not happening, because with Billy, now Billy has a license for that one song, Dream On, Texas Ladies. And he can sell 500 copies because he tried to sell me 498 of them.
But coming to the economic realities, Bill Heyman again, but coming to the economic realities, it's, I believe, $42.50 per license for 500, $45 now for a license for 500, times, for argument's sake, 10 or 12 tracks, plus the production cost of the CD. It sort of begins to feel like you're a square dance music producer. Okay? Right there is a simple mathematical example of what every producer faces on every single release, every single month. It's a big chunk.
Real quick, Tom Dillner. We're starting to do some more commercial work along this lines, even outside the square dance world. And we do go purchase the mechanical license for each track on the CD, and we put it on the CD cover, either on the front or the back, because we have been called on the carpet for that. And yeah, you spend $450 for the mechanical license, and you spend $umpteen to make all 10 tracks. But that's the price of doing business, folks. Oh, yeah.
Roy Goddard from New Jersey again. I don't think we ever answered Al's question from half hour ago, where he's at a round dance and there's some square dancers there that want to do a tip, and he purchased a CD with some square dance singing calls on it. Can he play it? I think there's 2 issues here. One, does his BMI ASCAP license permit him to play that, assuming he bought a CD in good faith, assuming that the person he bought it from has all the appropriate licenses? In other words, one, is he legally able to play that at the square dance or the round dance with his license? Because I would think in good faith purchase, he's not responsible for someone selling him an illegal record.
Tim Crawford. In Canada, I know for a fact you cannot play it. And when you buy a copy of a record, it's for your personal enjoyment only. If you want to play that piece of music, you have to have a performance license to play the music. Even if you're... Oh, I thought you were talking as a dancer. Oh, then you're good.
I'm not sure if he is or not.
Oh, just... thanks,
Mike. This is Al Shaw again. From what I'm hearing, if it has the license on that Tom is putting on, it says it has the license on there, then I should be able to feel secure in it. If it does not have that on there, then I should not feel secure.
So, I mean, you're still asking 2 different things, because Hi, I'm John Kaltenthaler. Tony Oxendine. If you had a tape, if you had Tom Miller's tape, now it's my impression, John, and you probably know this better than I do. My license, my BMI ASCAP license, will allow me to call squares and do lines, but not rounds. I think I can do rounds. I didn't think I could. Then I would think you could do squares, but that would still not get you out of whether he had paid mechanical rights for a tape or not for you to play that. I'm not sure that that still to me sounds like really gray.
If you buy a tape which is illegally produced, I don't know. Yeah, I'm Tony Oxendine. No, John Kaltenthaler. If you buy a tape that has been produced illegally and you play it, you're in jeopardy. If you don't know whether that tape is produced legally or not, that's a different ballgame. But you run the risk because you're doing it. Your license covers your performance for BMI and ASCAP. But if you obtain a record which has been or a disc which has been illegally produced, even though it's unknown to you, you run the risk. Yeah, well, you got a BMI license. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let's separate the two things. One is the tape that the caller gave you, maybe he made it legally or not. But a record that Royal Records sells that they've gotten a license for and they've sold it to you, it's your property, and you have a performance license, I see no problem with playing that record. Any legal record, your performance license will cover your use of, square or round, at the dance. But the other issue is a tape that's made randomly by a caller who's on the road and wants to publicize himself. He got Tony's permission to use a Royal record, but that does not give him the permission to reproduce that performance. And so that tape is illegal, and no performance license will cover it.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah.
Mike Oliveri, Colorado. We've covered a lot of topics during this session, and gentlemen back here touched on it. Without any enforcement, there's not really a big bite. My question is, being fairly new to CALLERLAB, only 8-9 years, the ethics committee, I'm sure ethics grievances have been filed. What kind of penalties or what kind of grievances have been filed and what kind of penalties have been handed out or could be handed out?
Number one, the ethics committee, the chairman of the ethics committee is the immediate past chairman of CALLERLAB. He has a committee. If he receives a complaint in writing, he may either investigate it himself or appoint a number of individuals to do the investigation. We are not a policing agency. And this whole business with ASCAP, BMI, licensing, and so forth, you would run the risk individually. And if you're willing to take that risk, so be it. But you also might get a letter saying you owe me $10,000. I'm not willing to take that risk. I buy the records. I keep the records. I'm too old to start a new technology. I don't have the same problem of buying somebody's CD or tape. I don't know of any ethical complaints concerning licensing. Caller. You mean if a caller has actively purchased an illegal one, tried to use? You'd have to talk to some of the people who have been chairman of the ethics committee. I don't try to keep track of it, and I don't know that we've ever published anything on ethical violations. Jim? Yeah.
I have been on the ethics committee. I know how it operates. The idea is that we try to bring in the offender, scare the pants off, and get them in line and send them off down the road. We have no real striking power. We are an organization that is self-policing. However, if SOCAN or BMI or ASCAP come into your dance, believe me, if they decide to prosecute, they will. One of the biggest offenders we have in Canada is the disc jockeys. They laid one fellow low in Winnipeg to the tune of $300,000. Every disc jockey in the Canada now, I believe, is licensed because of that one case. All we need is one case, and all this would stop real quick, because that one caller would suffer quite a fine.
To give you an example that some things do happen, John Kaltenthaler again, we have an individual in our area who uses CDs. And he took all of his records and he put them on CDs. Perfectly legal. That's his use. But if he then gets rid of his records, he is no longer licensed, and he runs the risk. If BMI comes in and says, "Are you licensed? Do you have this record?" Well, no, I don't have it, or yes, I do. That's a risk, and that's the kind of thing that you're talking about. Now, CALLERLAB is not a policing agency. If somebody wants to say, this guy violated Section 9 of our Code of Ethics, which you can read what it says there, that's an ethical complaint. And if it's in writing, then the ethics chairman has to take action. But I don't know of any action that we've ever taken. Jim, do you want to address that issue?
I don't want to address that issue, but in fact, I'm also unaware of any licensing matter that has been brought before the Ethics Committee. But I do want to say in this session that I think I'm the only person in the room who's been chairman of the Ethics Committee. You've been on it, but I have recent experience. Most of CALLERLAB's ethical complaints have to do with the kind of thing you mentioned, double booking, or somebody didn't show up, or they had an argument. In truth, my experience has been that almost all of the ethical complaints arise out of communication difficulty. People fail to accurately send and receive messages. Whether they do it in writing or on a phone or in person, that's the origin of most of the ethical complaints we have. Usually we can deal with them by facilitating that communication. We talk to both parties. We try to make the situations go. We have no legal authority. We cannot enforce anything. We can't. The most extreme punishment that I'm aware of that the Ethics Committee has ever exacted is that we asked a caller to come and apologize to the Board of Governors. And that caller will never, ever forget the experience. He did it, and behavior changed. But that's the most extreme thing we can do. If he told us to stuff it and wanted gone on his way, there's not a thing we could have done about it. But we do have some influence. But the Ethics Committee didn't do that.
One last word from Elmer.
Elmer, Sheffield. Basically, the way I see this thing is nobody's going to come in and police our dances, really, if you want to be realistic about it. It boils down to a moral issue for each and every one of us. And that's the way it should be. I'm not going to copy any music and use it illegally, and everybody else should feel the same way. We shouldn't have to have anybody looking over our shoulder. It's just wrong. And that's the way it should be handled.
I'm not in the pirating business, but I know something about the pirating business. And if the licensing people know that you're pirating, they won't move in the beginning. I think you guys know about this. They let you exhaust the sales, and then they come in and they get you for all the residuals that you blew, and they also get you fine and suspension and all that. So that beware. I think most of the guys know about that.
You guys are getting on our time now.
Well, I just want to, what Bill said about filling in for Jerry Junk, and Jerry said we had to get back to being gentlemen again. And I think that's what it's going to have to be. I can't see anybody doing any kind of policing or looking over your shoulder or whatever it's going to be. I am one of those people that have put CDs out on the market and had asked this, the producers to get permission, but did not go through Harry Fox because of the money that you're going to end up paying. And I'm going to have to come to the point where I have to quit doing that. It just doesn't work. It's not worth the risk. But the the ethics committee that we're talking about, isn't that always the past chairman? Is it a committee of one always?
John Kaltenthaler, he is a committee chairman. He can appoint as many or as few people as he wants to do the investigation, or he may do it himself. Or she may do it herself. Because we have had a woman chairman in the past. Martin.
I'd like to thank these two here for spending most of their time out on the floor talking to you. And I'd like to thank you all for coming here and joining us. We've had some valuable information. Most of it, I think, is very straight and to the point. We cannot live with copying, because if we do, we're going to put our very essential business people out of work. Their business will die, and we will not have music to call to. And we can't afford that. Let's support our producers. And that means that we have to be ethical. We have to tell the other people, hey, don't do that. We need their music. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Bill. Thank you, John.